Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, I'm FedRAMP Authorized, What's Next? Today we have two subject matter experts here to talk to you about what comes after you've received your ATO, what exactly continuous monitoring is, and how it helps you maintain compliance with FedRAMP guidelines. First, we have Milica Green, FedRAMP Compliance SME, Telos. Milica Green joined Telos in June 2017 and serves as a compliance subject matter expert. She is a skilled cybersecurity and compliance professional, experienced in information systems certification and accreditation and information technology security. At Telos, Milica provides expert support, analysis, research, and advice into complex compliance problems in support of the Xacta application. She applies domain knowledge in effort to translate functional needs into technical security solutions. Milica is a certified Amazon Web Services, AWS, solutions architect and graduated with a bachelor's degree in business leadership from George Mason University. We also have Gianna Price, Xacta Solutions Architect, Telos. Gianna Price joined Telos in 2018 as an Xacta Solutions Architect and serves as a cybersecurity subject matter expert. She is a skilled specialist with 17 years of experience, 15 of which she spent in cybersecurity for the Department of Defense. Gianna works directly with customers, providing expertise in cybersecurity program development, the NIST Risk Management Framework, RMF, and their implications in operational environments. Take it away, Milica and Gianna.
As we already discussed in our previous webinars, there are two different ways to achieve FedRAMP authorization. And that's either finding an agency to sponsor you and getting agency ATO, or going through FedRAMP Connect and being prioritized to get a provisional ATO with Joint Authorization Board. So we already discussed those, how to become FedRAMP ready and how to get authorized in our previous webinars. If you need more information on that, please refer to those webinars. Today we'll be discussing ConMon, and so that's the phase 4. After you receive your ATO, now what happens? Nothing ends. Now actually the work starts, and you have to do the continuous monitoring on an ongoing basis in order to keep your authorization. And now we'll go into what continuous monitoring is, and Gianna, you can take off.
Great, thanks, Milica. Good afternoon, everyone. So now that we've completed the overview of FedRAMP, let's dive into continuous monitoring, also known as ConMon. So what is ConMon? The NIST Special Pub 800-137 defines continuous monitoring as maintaining ongoing awareness to support organizational risk decisions. So in short, it's a collection of manual and automated processes that monitor the effectiveness of the security posture of a particular system or boundary. So ConMon is required to obtain and also to maintain your FedRAMP authorization and authorization under kind of the traditional RMF. So if you look at the graphic that we have here, you'll see there's several contributors to a system's overall security. For this example, we have people, processes, technologies, and environments. So data from each of these components are collected and analyzed both in part and holistically under ConMon. So I'm not going to take a deep dive into the NIST tier structure, but you can see at a high level, the aggregate data allows you to make a risk-based decision at the organizational level for Tier 1, mission or business level for Tier 2, and then you'll see at Tier 3, it's really kind of the individual data feeds that are providing a much more granular level of risk. So why do we have ConMon? So ConMon falls in the category of new enforcement of a very old requirement, something that we know well in the compliance world. So ConMon was previously known as continuous assessment and probably had another name before that. The emphasis to validate the Con Mon strategy at the beginning of the ANA process, that's kind of new, and I think part of the reason for that is many organizations just weren't doing continuous monitoring properly. There were some organizations that thought continuous monitoring was solely taking a third of your security controls and checking them on an annual basis, which can be a portion of your strategy, but nothing to solely hang your hat Others, I think, thought if they received C&D, Computer Network Defense Services, from a parent or partner organization, that their ConMon was covered and no further action was required, which is not the case. So I'm sure there's many other scenarios, but it led to the mentality or approach of a credit and forget it. And that approach is as it sounds. So do whatever it takes to get your authorization, and then you ride your golden ticket through the length of your authorization. So clearly not following best security practices under that approach. So moving forward, here we have two process wheels, both including ConMon. We have the Risk Management Framework in the top right, and then we have the FedRAMP Security Assessment Framework, which uses RMF as its foundation, on the bottom left. So if you look back at the RMF wheel on the right, you can see ConMon is depicted. That's step 6, monitoring controls. While its role in step 6 is critical, organizations that wait to address ConMon until this point, they're going to struggle, as there's a great deal of planning and execution that's required early on in both the RMF and FedRAMP processes. So to help mitigate this unfortunately common issue, FedRAMP has taken advantage of the inherent flexibilities that come with RMF, and they've established specific policies and procedures for executing ConMon under FedRAMP. So the expectations of developing and executing a continuous monitoring strategy, we'll cover those in the next couple of slides, but generally speaking, they define that, you know, the cadence for which you have to substantiate your compliance, as well as they prescribe the applicable report formats, or their preference for a report format. So again, I'll be just touching on those. Milica is going to take the deep dive into the specific detail of FedRAMP ConMon once we get through this. So both RMF and, as a result, FedRAMP leverage NIST Special Pub 137, which is the guidance for ConMon. So when many people think of continuous monitoring, again, they think of step 6 in the RMF, and that's not wrong. However, what we'll cover in the next couple slides is how to execute ConMon, which is what you're doing in step 6, but also to develop the strategy for which you're going to execute. So I think the ConMon steps that we have here are pretty easy to grasp. We want to define our ConMon strategy, establish the ConMon program, implement a ConMon program. Once implemented, we're going to analyze the results of the data that's collected, report any applicable findings, and then respond to those findings. And then if we need to do some process improvement or update our strategy, we're going to go ahead and do that. So the first step is to define our ConMon strategy. So the strategy discussion really needs to be looked at from two perspectives. So that you have the initial work to develop the plan or strategy. These are your pre-authorization activities. That's going to help you obtain your authorization. And then the second is the actual execution of the ConMon itself, which is traditionally your post-authorization activities, and that'll help you to maintain your authorization. So as we dive into each of these process steps, I'm going to ask for you to think of ConMon as a security maintenance plan for your authorization boundary, much like a vehicle has a maintenance plan. So quick obligatory disclaimer, I know very little about cars, and neither Telos or I are authorized to provide guidance on automobile manufacturing and maintenance. This analogy is intended to fully simplify or further simplify a complicated risk management process. Implementing automobile maintenance is strictly the responsibility of the webinar participant and shall not hold Telos responsible for the misinformation associated. So disclaimer out of the way. Now we can move on. So when manufacturing a vehicle, there are several things to consider. So let's assume that you've already identified the type of vehicle that you intend to build. You've selected core components such as a transmission, battery, braking systems, tires, so forth. So as we develop these key components, we establish minimum requirements for things such as fluids, the size of the battery, tire pressure, and so on. So these specifications help to ensure the performance and the safety of the components and therefore the vehicle itself. So then if we're going to jump back then to our system, when we're building a system, we need to dissect the components and determine what we have and what we need to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability of those components. So the information that we collect here becomes part of our ConMon strategy. So we're basically identifying this is what healthy or a secure system looks like. So way before you even get authorized, you need to identify what people, processes, and technologies, or fluids, batteries, and PSI you need to plan for to ensure optimal performance, safety, and security. So in addition to the security baseline, we need to identify how we will routinely assess the health of our system. So as a result, we need to identify technologies such as sensors and alerts to let us know the difference between low tire pressure or an overheating engine. So in addition, we need to establish preventative maintenance strategies such as getting an oil change every 3,000 to 5,000 miles, rotating tires, so on and so forth. So you can see specifying the methods we employ to routinely assess the health of our vehicle is one part of the equation, and then the other is the frequency in which it makes sense to look under the hood. So to complicate, or not complicate, some people find it complicated, to complement your strategy, FedRAMP has established their expectations for what they want you to assess and the frequency in which they want you to assess it. But the how piece of this is really up to the CSP, ISV to dissect for their particular solution. So the image that we have here on the screen, this is straight from a FedRAMP template. We're going to point you to those resources at the end. And again, Milica is going to kind of go into some of the FedRAMP specifications. So now that we have defined our strategy, it's time to establish the organizational infrastructure to support its execution. So this step is pretty clear. We want to actually acquire the people, processes, and technologies that we'll need to execute our plan. Sounds like common sense, right? In addition to the acquisition of all the components, we want to identify and educate our Con Mon stakeholders. So keeping with our vehicle analogy, we want our manufacturers and mechanics to understand our strategy and the role they play in its execution. We want to outline the expectations associated with what healthy looks like, how it'll be monitored, and at what frequency. And then if we have new technologies, such as a hybrid engine, we want to ensure that our fuel system mechanics are familiar with the baseline, the sensors, and associated alerts. So and further, we want to ensure processes such as incident response procedures for recalls are able to be quickly distributed with like prescribed maintenance and mitigate any defects. So jumping back to our system, we want to select technical assessment tools to help us assess the health of our operating environment, and we want to establish business processes to address change management, identity and access management, as well as many others that we find in the control family. So when you initially establish your Con Mon, you'll want to evaluate the effectiveness of the strategy itself. So this is not to say that you only assess the strategy once. It's a process. Like with any process, things change, and they'll need to be adjusted to stay relevant. However, if enough work enough effort is needed up front, the initial strategy should only need to be updated at the rate of change of the operating environment in most cases. So in the first column, we're looking at the Con Mon program itself, and the second is the actual analysis that's conducted at the system level as a result of executing the strategy. So we're going to just touch on a couple of these really quick. I think the slides will be made available so you can go back and read through those. But first, looking at the column on the left, it's important to ask yourself some of these questions just to make sure that your program is working as anticipated. So are the resource allocations appropriate? Can the process be further automated? Is there a feedback loop to keep this process in common sense Con Mon versus Con Mon for compliance sake? So looking off to the right, what we traditionally think of Con Mon is reflected there. This is where you're actively assessing the security posture of your system or boundary. You're ingesting and analyzing data from various sources to determine the health of your system. So examples of what you would analyze here are all my assets being assessed, are they being assessed against the latest criteria, and what are the results of the assessments, and are any further actions required? So once the data has been analyzed and findings have been validated, you'll want to respond, right? From a technological perspective, these are actions that are probably largely the responsibility of your security operations team. So by following your Con Mon strategy as well as your incident response plan, you should be able to identify, remediate, and report findings based on severity and impact. That's kind of the goal here. So I think Respond is one that we're pretty comfortable with. So I'm going to, if you guys have questions about Respond, feel free to put them in the chat, but we're gonna just keep things rolling because we have a lot to cover here. All right. At any stage in the process, if something is not working accurately or efficiently, you're going to want to review the Con Mon strategy and make necessary adjustments. So if you're in the pre-authorization phase, you're certainly going to want to coordinate this with your 3PAO. If you're in the post-authorization phase, you're going to want to make sure that you work with the agency that issued you your authorization. So the reason being, your authorization has been issued a specific Con Mon, or your authorization was issued based on a specific Con Mon strategy, and any adjustments to that strategy could impact your system positively or negatively. So by having a formal agreement between the cloud service provider and the FedRAMP official, we clearly establish the baseline security configuration the authorization boundary possesses, as well as the ways in which the security posture will be maintained. So since there is a history of a credit and forget it, we really need to take this seriously to mitigate the risk of exposure and compromise that can come from misconfigured cloud resources. So before we depart from the NIST 800-137 overview of Con Mon, I wanted to close with our vehicle analogy. So we're driving off the lot in our new vehicle. We've got a V8 autonomous driving, leather seats, about 30 cup holders, new car smell, highest safety rating that there is. Things couldn't be better. Best investment you've ever made. Very exciting. So fast forward, and you've skipped all preventative maintenance and recalls, and you even decided not to get an annual state inspection. And somehow, by the grace of God, you have not been pulled over. 3 years later, what is the condition of your vehicle? What assets would you transport in this vehicle? And what impact would you have on those sharing the highway with you? So this is why we do Con Mon. Developing the most secure system out of the gate is great. However, technology changes, as does the threat landscape. So as we move forward into the deep dive on FedRAMP, I would encourage you to not view the content strictly from a compliance lens, even though I'm sure that's why most of you dialed in, but one of security best practices. So with that, Milica, can you take us down the road of Con Mon under FedRAMP and tell us how we get this right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All right, so thanks for that analogy. I think that's really useful for people to understand. So now that we know how to create a Con Mon strategy, I would like to give you a little bit more understanding of what that means under FedRAMP requirements. But before we dive into specific requirements, let's just discuss the roles and responsibilities. They are part of the FedRAMP ConMon process. So we have authorizing official, which is going to be either your agency official or it's going to be joint authorization board, depending on your ATO. And authorizing official serves as a focal point for coordinating the Con Mon activities, and they're going to review your plan of action milestone. They'll review monthly scans that you provide, any incident response or incidents reports that you submit to them. They're going to review that, and then they're going to use this information to make a risk-based decision about your authorization. Then we have FedRAMP PMO, and they're responsible for the day-to-day activities of the FedRAMP program. Also, they are developing Con Mon monitoring standards to include real-time monitoring, to include any guidance from DHS, and to actually communicate all these changes across the community. And then we have a cloud service provider, or I assume most of you are cloud service providers. You are responsible for maintaining, once you receive your authorization to operate, you are responsible for maintaining the security of your system on an ongoing basis. And we'll go into that, so what that actually means. And then we have a 3PAO, and their responsibilities is to validate and verify the controls you've implemented are still performing as intended. And they'll do an annual assessment of your system. And so as part of that, they'll perform activities such as penetration testing, vulnerability scanning, some manual testing. They will ask for evidence, and they will provide their reports and submit those reports to the authorizing official for, approval, annual approval for your ATO. So that being said, when we look at the FedRAMP ConMon, we can recognize 3 different process areas. And so one of them is operational visibility, and by operational visibility, I mean now that you have an ATO, now you have to provide evidence on an ongoing basis that your system is still secure as it was at the beginning. So you will provide evidence in monthly, annual, and 3 years. And also sometimes you'll be asked to provide it on evidence on an ad hoc basis. So AO will use the deliverables to review and make decision if you're still going to keep your authorization to operate. And then we have a change control, which you have to implement the configuration change management process and follow the change control process that you have implemented as part of your initial assessment. That was approved as part of your initial assessment, and the reason behind it is because you have to maintain the secure baseline configuration for your system. And then incident response is the third area where FedRAMP really focuses, and you must demonstrate that you are able to adequately respond to security incidents. And that being said, as part of your FedRAMP authorization, you are required to develop and implement incident response plan, and that has been approved by authorizing official, and you have to test that plan at least annually. So once you receive your provisional ATO, and we'll focus on provisional ATO because agency to agency might have a slightly different requirements, but once you receive your provisional ATO, you are obligated to comply with the minimum requirements of complying with the Con Mon Strategy guide that is provided on FedRAMP.gov, as well with your Con Mon plan that was approved as part of your initial assessment. You're also required to mitigate all open findings in the time frame that FedRAMP has issued, which is, you have to remediate your high findings within 30 days, moderate findings within 90, and then low findings within 180 days. Third, you have to identify and manage any significant change in your system, and any critical vulnerabilities have to be managed based on the FedRAMP guidance. So pretty much as part of your P-ATO, you are agreeing to maintain the operational visibility, the change control, and the incident response process area of your system. So as you're developing your Con Mon strategy, there are certain things that you need to think about. For example, that FedRAMP has prescribed specific frequencies for specific controls, not for all of them, but for a pretty good amount of controls. So security controls have different frequencies for performance and review. Some controls require review more often than others. Some require deliverables, on a monthly basis, and we'll discuss that later. While others will be assessed during your annual assessment, right? So here we'll focus on, ongoing continuous monitoring, monthly and annual, and so we'll go in depth of each one of them and what's required by you. So as part of the ongoing Con Mon requirements, you must employ automated monitoring mechanisms to discover potential attacks, suspicious activities, or unauthorized connections. FedRAMP has a list of events that have to be monitored continuously, and such as successful and unsuccessful logon events, account management events, any administrative activity, and more. And you can find this list under the FedRAMP ConMon strategy guide, and also you can find it under FedRAMP SSP. And so while you're monitoring your system and you discover potential security incidents, once you discover an incident, you have to follow your incident response procedures to mitigate that incident, right? So as part of your incident response procedure, you have to include minimum timeframes to respond to those incidents, right? And you can find the minimum response times that provided by US CERT. You can use that. FedRAMP is especially concerned with the response time for Category 1 incident, which is unauthorized access. They expect that you report suspected unauthorized access within 1 hour of being identified. So you can't wait and do your review. You just have to report it immediately, like within 1 hour. And when it comes to change management process, your routinely day-to-day changes, they should be managed through your change management process, as you described it in your configuration management plan. But before employing any planned change into your production environment, you have to perform a system impact analysis. And this will give you an idea if this is a significant change, if it will alter your security of your system in any way. And if it does, then you have to submit a request for significant change. And then here we can see that FedRAMP has given out a list of possible significant changes. And it can be anything from upgrading your operating system to onboarding a new feature, or changing your infrastructure. Let's say you are on AWS and you want to change and be on Microsoft Azure. So now that is a significant change that you have to, and then you have to follow the process of submitting a significant change form to the authorizing official and providing all the detail that they need in order to make analysis and make a decision for you. And so when we talk about the monthly Con Mon requirements, there are specific deliverables that FedRAMP requires. On a monthly basis, you'll have to provide an updated inventory. You'll have to do your monthly scans and then provide the raw data from your scans. And you have to do the scans for your database, for your application, for the operating system, and even network layer, depending on your deployment model. And then anything that has been discovered in the scans have to be moved into the POA&M. So every vulnerability has to have a POA&M item associated with it. So you will update the POA&M as well, and that's going to be one of the deliverables for your monthly reporting. And everything is going to be uploaded to the OMB Max repository, where AO will do their review. And here you see on the right, this is provided by FedRAMP. It's kind of like a checklist to remind you of everything that you need to submit on a monthly basis. So you'll submit this together with all your deliverables. So when we talk about the FedRAMP vulnerability management, there are specific requirements that you have to follow. FedRAMP requires full range authenticated scans with all plugins enabled using an approved scanner. So the scanner has to be configured appropriately, and that configuration has to be tested by a 3PAO during your initial assessment, and you cannot change the configuration settings over time. If you wish to change configuration settings, you have to request for approval from your AO, and also they will ask for evidence that the configuration settings have not changed. So vulnerability scans must be performed using system credentials that allow full access to the system. Scans over 10% unauthenticated will be rejected unless you can provide a justification why you had that happen. And then each scan must include all components within your system boundary, and scans under 95% inventory coverage will be rejected. Again, if you can provide just good justification, you might get away with it. Results must be reported in a machine-readable format, such as JSON or XML. And prior to performing a scan, you must update the list of vulnerabilities scanned to the latest available list. And this is typically done automatically by your scanner, but you still have to check, make sure it was completed. This is more of like a checkbox, right? And so the scanner, as I mentioned, the scanner findings must end up in the POA&M. So they have to, each one of the findings has to have its own POA&M item, and it must have unique asset identified by the scanner as well. So each POA&M will tie to an asset within your authorization boundary. Okay, so the purpose of the POA&M is to facilitate a structured approach to mitigating risk in accordance with your risk management strategy. So the POA&M will include the findings and recommendations from ongoing security assessment, like your annual assessment, and also findings from your monthly Con Mon activities. It will also include any milestones associated with that finding and how you're planning to remediate it, and also will have the scheduled completion date. So pretty much FedRAMP is going to use this to track your status of your continuous monitoring, if you can actually deliver what you promised at the beginning, right? So the POA&M workbook has two different spreadsheets. One is going to be open tab, and the other one is closed tab. So in the open tab spreadsheet, you'll include all security weaknesses that have been identified through either annual assessment or your monthly activities, common activities, and you'll add everything that's still open on the Open tab. Each item must have a unique identifier and so forth. On the Close tab, you will have anything that has been closed since the last deliverable date. So if anything was closed, you have to put it on a Close tab, but you also have to include any evidence to state, hey, yes, this is the reason why we closed that, and here are the evidence why this is not a finding anymore. So this is typical happening with like false positives. So if you discover, and this will happen, once you discover false positives within your scans, you can submit a deviation request to be approved that this is, and provide a justification, and then you can move that false positive onto the Close tab, and it can remain there. So now that we discussed, I already mentioned a deviation request, right? So during your Con Mon process, there will be time when you will discover vulnerabilities such as, operational requirements of vendor dependencies, or you'll find certain weaknesses that are high, but you think there should be a moderate. Then you can request a risk adjustment, right? And also false positives that I mentioned. For all of these, you can submit a deviation request in order to adjust them. So, for example, if you have operational requirement, that's something that your system cannot work with that, but there's no way for you to fix it immediately. There's a lot of, time and effort, and, it's impossible to fix it right away. You, first of all, if it's high, if the operational requirement is, it's a high vulnerability, you first have to mitigate it down to moderate, and then you have to provide a justification why this is operational requirement, and then submit the deviation request. And so the operational requirement will stay on your POA&M on the Open tab indefinitely or until it's fixed. And it's kind of similar with the vendor dependencies, right? So if you have a vulnerability that is associated with your vendor, with the technology that you're getting from a third party, you have to submit a deviation request, and you have to show why this is vendor dependent, and you also have to show that you are checking in with your vendor every 30 days. So this is where they're going to look to see when was the last time you checked in with the vendor. And also stays on Open tab until you implement the fixes that vendor has provided or change technology. And so when it comes down to the timeline of when to submit the deviation request, you should be really careful about that. So you should, let's say if you have a high finding, you have a false positive that is a high, and you need to submit a deviation request. You have to submit it before the 30-day, before you actually submit your monthly deliverables. So you cannot submit it at the same time as you're submitting your deliverables, because it's going to be considered late. When it comes to like moderate, and let's say you have operational requirement that's moderate, then you submit a deviation request, prior to the 90 days. So you don't have to submit it immediately, but you can wait, like 2 months and then submit or right before that, 90 days up. Okay, so when we talk about the monthly deliverables, just a few things to point out that, when you're doing your monthly scans on a monthly basis, you make sure that you reconcile your POA&M findings so that all the results from scans are now in your POA&M and they're all identified there, and then anything that's closed, you move it to the Close tab and so forth. We already mentioned that. And then you select your monthly ConMon scan and POA&M delivery date wisely. This is really important. You have to consider your vendor patches schedule, and you have to plan to scan as soon as possible after you patch your system. So if your monthly scans are out of sync with your patch cycle, the number of vulnerabilities will increase, and this is like artificial increase. So once you submit as part of your ConMon data, every vulnerability must be addressed, and in a way that you're either going to fix it within a time frame, or you have to address it in a way of a risk adjustment or submit a deviation request. But everything has to be addressed. All right, so when it comes to the annual assessment, there's certain things that need to happen even before you actually, start the assessment. You have to plan ahead of time. You must develop a schedule including all the milestones and timelines and resources to support this annual assessment, and you provide it to the AO, authorizing official. So it shows that you are serious and you have all the resources to support the assessment because it is, a lot of work to be done. And so you require, before you start the assessment, you also require to review and update your SSP and on all the supporting documents. If anything changed over time within that 1 year, everything has to be reflected within your documentation. So prior to starting the assessment, you will determine the scope of the assessment, and you have to test 1/3 of your controls. So you're not testing all the controls as you did for the initial assessment. You can, of course, work with your 3PAO to figure out what the scope will look like. You will include all the FedRAMP core controls that are required, and then additional controls you'll pick out based on the frequency. Certain controls have to be tested annually, so you will include those. And then if anything has failed, during your monthly ConMon, if any controls have failed and have like deviations requests, you will include them as well to retest them. But there is more a detailed guide into how to determine what is going to be in your scope and how to pick the control. So please go on to FedRAMP.gov and look for the ConMon and annual assessment guidance. So as part of your annual assessment, you have to hire a 3PAO. Usually that's your 3PAO that you had for your initial assessment. And they have to complete the assessment. It'll be pretty much done in the same way as it was for initial assessment, but with a smaller scope. So they will do the penetration testing, they'll do the vulnerability scanning, they will deliver reports such as SAP, SAR, and all the supporting documents. And of course, you also have to provide a plan, completed plan that has been reconciled. Okay, so in the event that you fail to meet any of the minimum Con Mon requirements that we just discussed, this could result in escalation actions by FedRAMP. And it could be something simple from just FedRAMP may monitor you more closely to see, and without taking any further action, just like seeing what is happening in your system and why you're failing, right? But if you fail something multiple times, they will put you in a detailed finding review to see if you have the same findings showing up, multiple times. You have to do the detailed finding review, and then if you don't meet it within a time frame that they request, they might even escalate to corrective action plan. And then if you even fail that, it could lead to suspension or even revocation of your ATO. So this is a list of the possible triggers, and you can actually find this in the Con Mon Strategy guide. In the Con Mon Strategy guide with the minimum escalation levels. And so, for example, if the vulnerability count increases by 30% from the P-ATO baseline, FedRAMP will require a detailed finding review. But in case of late remediation for your high findings, they will put you on a corrective action plan. So there are certain things that depending on the severity of failure or a trigger, deficiency trigger, it will be a different action that they will take. And you should get familiar with these. Well, that pretty much wraps it up for today, and I just want to do a little recap of what we've discussed. We defined a Con Mon strategy under FedRAMP program using NIST 137. And I hope that right now you have a better understanding how to create a Con Mon plan and establish measures and metrics to report on status of the security control. So as you're developing your Con Mon strategy, make sure that you're accounting for the FedRAMP required frequencies and deliverables. As a reminder, on a monthly basis, you need to do your vulnerability scanning, your POA&M, reconcile your POA&M, update your inventory, and then provide any ad hoc incident response. On an annual basis, you'll have to hire a 3PAO and do the annual assessment. And just as a reminder, for the FedRAMP timeframe, to figure out the time frame for fixing out your high vulnerabilities, 30 days, moderate, it'll be 90 days, and low, 180. Gianna, do you have anything to add besides, just wrapping up for the Con Mon strategy?
No, I mean, I think you did a great job. There's a lot of unique characteristics, I think, to FedRAMP that, folks that are used to traditional RMF need to get used to, and obviously need to make themselves familiar with the FedRAMP resources.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the next slide, you'll see the FedRAMP resources. You can find them on FedRAMP.gov, and you should really get familiar with these because there's a lot of information on here. This is your best bet to go there and just check what's new. If you are looking for a tool that can help you automate Con Mon process, Xacta 360 is just right for that. It's a purpose-built for FedRAMP and allows you to create your initial package, maintain the package, and conduct a continuous monitoring, allowing you to track and export your POA&M for your monthly deliverables. And I think now we have some time for questions. Let's see what's there.
Thank you for that presentation, Milica and Gianna. I'd like to open the floor for questions, any questions the audience might have. Please feel free to submit a question into the WebEx Q&A box or submit them directly to the Telos Corporation account. And I do see some coming in. Here's the first one we have. What happens if we cannot mitigate high finding within 30 days time frame?
So, I mean, this is one of the, FedRAMP showstoppers pretty much. This is something that they really want to see as part of your initial authorization. They want to see that you are able to meet the timelines as they described, right? So if you cannot meet the finding within 30 days, you have to figure out a mitigation strategy, something that you can mitigate that finding that now you can lower it down to moderate. And then, of course, have a plan for future how you're actually going to execute this and how you're going to fix it.
Okay. Here's another one. Is it acceptable to request a risk adjustment if the cost effort is too great to remediate a weakness within the required time frame?
So if you, not exactly. So if just not having enough resources, or if the cost is too high, that is really not enough, a justification for you to submit a risk adjustment. But you can always work with your authorizing official, and they're usually open to working with you, just trying to figure out the best way to fix something and include some, mitigation. As I mentioned, it's kind of, previous question and this question go hand in hand in a way. So you can, have some mitigation strategy in place that will help, authorizing official be more open to accepting that risk adjustment.
When adding a new service or feature to a JAB authorized system, should we follow the new services onboarding process or the significant change process?
So it really depends. The new service onboarding process, that is usually intended if you have a significant number of planned new services. But if you have just a few, then you will use the significant change form and submit that to the AO. And if the system is going to be affected by if the system is going to be impacted in a significant way, then yes, you're going to do the significant change process.
Okay, here's another one. An agency customer wants annual reports from the CSP. How can we identify and reach out to an AO for a given CSP for those annual reports?
Kind of this question is kind of a little bit unclear, so I'm not sure if you are. I'm not sure if this is meant in a way you as a CSP that need to provide reports, or someone you're leveraging, like another either a platform or infrastructure you're leveraging, you're looking to see into their reports. If you're looking to see if you're looking to see what your requirement is, you need to communicate with your AO. So sometimes, like if it's joint authorization board, it's really pretty clear what you need to do. When it comes to agency, there could be some differences, and it depends on the agency what their focus is. So they can request some different ad hoc reports, but in reality, it should be the same reporting that FedRAMP is requiring for joint authorization board. If you are looking for, to see the reports that are associated with the underlying platform, usually they will not provide you with that, but you can reach out to the authorizing official of that specific platform or infrastructure as a service and request a package. But I don't see that happening. It's just usually if the agency wants to leverage that, they can get it. So I think there's one about the Xacta. Okay, so how do you automate into Xacta 360? So for the scans, if you're doing a ConMon, we have additional product which is called Continuum, and Continuum, you'll be able to adjust your scans from your Nessus, for example, or Qualis. So you'll add the data into Continuum, and Continuum is able to map, all the findings to the controls, and it will fail those controls, and you bring that information into Xacta, and then that's how you maintain your POA&M, Plan of Action Milestone, with the Xacta.
Okay, I think that's it for what we have today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this webinar. For more information about Telos, the Xacta 360 application for FedRAMP, or anything else discussed during the presentation, please reach out to Ben Cronin at the phone number or email address shown on your screen, or visit our website. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.